Hello, everybody, and welcome to the AGSC and APRA co-presented webinar, part of the at-home sessions in conversation with Kevin Penkin. Tonight's talk will be with Kevin and Mina Shamali, who is stepping in for Natalie Jeffries, who is unwell, unfortunately. So welcome to you, Mina.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome, Kevin.
Hiya.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Greg Morrow, who is from APRA, who is the screen manager, and Mark Byes from the AGSC, who'll be helping field questions. So hello, everybody. Just very briefly, I'll just let you know about Mina. Mina is the host of the game show, which is the video game music show on ABC Classic. He's also a games composer himself, and I've been told he plays Kevin's music on the show frequently, so he's very well acquainted with his music. And we thank Mina very much for stepping in at the last minute tonight. Fantastic.
My pleasure.
Okay, so Mina, I'm going to throw over to you if you can just give us a little bit of background on Kevin, and welcome everybody, and your other little hosting roles as interviewer.
Sounds good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's In Conversation. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander owners of country throughout Australia. I'd like to pay our respects to them and their culture and their elders, past, present, and emerging. It is on their land that we stand and tell these stories and make music, and this is a storytelling tradition of over 60,000 years. And this always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. Now, the main event, Kevin Penkin. Such a pleasure to be talking to you tonight. I'll give you a little bit of background about Kevin. Kevin Penkin is based in Melbourne. He is a BAFTA-nominated composer for Japanese animation and video games. He's best known for composing the award-winning score to Made in Abyss and the music to the BAFTA award-winning game Florence. It was named one of 2018's top games of the year in Time magazine. Kevin moved to London in 2013 to complete a master's degree in composition for screen at the Royal College of Music. And during this time, he collaborated with legendary video game composer Nobuo Uematsu on a number of Japanese video game titles, which eventually led him to break into the anime industry. After releasing his breakthrough score for Made in Abyss, Kevin Penkin continued to compose music for Japanese animation with scores for The Rising of the Shield Hero and Tower of God. Throughout his career, Kevin has recorded with orchestras all around the world. His work's been recorded in Prague, Vienna, Macedonia, Boston, Nashville, and right here in Australia. He's also collaborated with acclaimed singers Takeshi Saito, Emmy Evans, and Raj Ramaya. In 2020, Kevin's composed for these projects that are releasing this year, like Dawn of the Deep Soul, Tower of God, and the Netflix animation Eden. Quite a scrumptious bio, I should say. Quite the career you've had, Kevin. Sorry?
Try and make it concise, I guess.
That's being concise. That's fantastic. Well, so far, we're in 2020, the year of quarantine, the year of lockdown, the year of absolute weirdness. Has quarantine helped or hindered your creative process this year?
Well, my 2019 was kind of stressy. So actually, obviously, I would prefer for COVID to not be a thing. But it did come at a year when I personally was going to take a little bit more time to just kind of chill and not be a stress ball for a while. So it hasn't, I haven't had to record anything so far. And I haven't I cut a trip short and stuff, which in the grand scheme of things is a nothing burger. So it's been a year of reflection. It was going to be a year of reflection anyway. It's just a year of forced reflection now.
Well, let's reflect back on your career up to this point. How did you get started, and how did you end up at this point in time?
Yeah, so originally from Perth, and I moved, as you said, to London, sort of early 20s. Did my degree in London. Stayed because I wasn't keen at the time to come back to Australia. I wanted to sort of stay in London and kind of experience that overseas sort of thing for a little bit longer. Eventually, I was going to either move to like Japan or Melbourne, and I remember getting sort of a little bit, intoxicated with my manager and my agent in a bar in Melbourne, like late 2018. And I was like, okay, actually, no, I'm going to move to Melbourne. So, like, Melbourne was like where I was really feeling it at the time. So ended up moving here. Couldn't have asked for more. It was a really lucky move. Get to be around really great friends. I'm like 4 hours away from family now via plane, like not 24 hours, like, plague, putting to the side plague for a second, like, it's good. And as you mentioned, like a lot of my, like I do a lot of work with Japan, and I really like the fact that, again, putting the plague to the side for a second, being able to like get on a plane in the morning, fly to Japan, arrive by night, and then be eating sushi by like 8 p.m. in Tokyo. That's a good feeling. That's something that with no jet lag. Jet lag sucks.
Yeah.
Jet lag sucks a lot. I don't recommend jet lag.
Amen.
But yeah. Anyway, sorry, before I derail this conversation at the 5-minute mark. So basically I went to college and then sort of like kind of did a lot of stuff there, and then eventually landed here.
Wonderful. And how did you find yourself composing for games specifically? Is that something you always knew you wanted to do, or did you fall into what happened? So
I started from games. It was there are these concerts that they used to happen called they still happen, of course, but Distant Worlds, music from Final Fantasy. They happen all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And Uematsu, the main composer, he was attending. He attends a lot of these concerts, and when I was like in high school, I was like hella keen on Final Fantasy. I still am, but like when you're in high school, you've got a lot more time to be more intense about things. So I was very, very keen on Final Fantasy, specifically the music. Loved the composer, loved what he was doing, all that sort of thing. And because he was attending these concerts, I got to meet him, and I met his manager as well during sort of like the dress rehearsal, which was crazy. Then, because I was still living in Perth at the time, you could fly over to Japan with relative ease. I would just basically like save all year and then go at the end of the year. That would be like my shtick for like 3 years. And then every year I would be like, "Hi, I'm coming to Japan. Like, would you like to meet up?" Sort of thing. And eventually that led to actually getting some game work through that contact. Nothing to do with the series Final Fantasy, but with Uematsu-san. And what basically happened is I would submit demos on a CD. Bless my heart at the time. Submit a CD with like a custom, like I would type out and I'd try and translate all the silly names that I put on these compositions and all that sort of thing. Be like, this is what I've been doing for like 12 months, essentially. Yeah. And eventually that kind of worked out, because they were like, "Hey, well, we've got this small game. We must write the main theme. Would you be interested in arranging that theme and also writing the background music, BGM, for all the other things that aren't the main theme? Like, can you write the tension theme, the love theme, all that sort of thing? Can you do all that yourself originally?" And so that was the first thing. Yeah. But one of those small games, it had a title called Norn 9, Norn number 9. Mm-hmm. Now that ended up becoming an anime adapted from the video game, which I also ended up writing music for. Really? So that was like that crossover, which kind of just opened everything up. And then that studio that made that animated version of the game that I wrote a couple of years prior to that, they actually ended up doing Made in Abyss, which was sort of how things kind of kicked off a little bit.
And then the snowball happens.
And then there's a little snowball, and it's trying to hold on at this point, my friend.
Now, there's obviously a lot of composers for screen attending this talk, and a lot of people who come to compose for screen compose because of Star Wars. They're like, I heard Star Wars, and I knew I wanted to write music for film. Do you reckon it's kind of like that for games with Nobuo Uematsu and Final Fantasy? It's like, I heard Nobuo Uematsu, and I wanted to become a games composer.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a correlation there. It's like, person doing awesome thing in field that I have interest in, me doing like, that's what it comes down to. So, like, I was always really keen on games and anime. But the games came first, as I said. But then that got me interested. I mean, that got me personally interested in Japanese culture. And so I ended up learning the language to a conversational fluent level by this point. But then because I got interested in Japanese language and culture through games, then the anime was an extension of that culture. So it actually kind of like clicked that way. There wasn't like games, anime, Japan. It was actually games, anime. Sorry, like games, Japan, anime.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like a weird way of going about things. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, like you find that the person who sort of hit that apex in that field, and you're like, that's awesome. How do I kind of do that? But then, eventually you realize, like, how do I do that in my own way?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, tell us, you are both a film composer and a game composer. So your experience with the two mediums, as it pertains maybe to the contrast and the comparisons, because we've got film composers and game composers watching. What should they know about the two mediums from your perspective and experience?
Ooh, I mean, that's how long we got?
How long is a piece of string? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, so like for what it's worth, from my experience and sort of my opinion, because I enjoy both for different reasons and at different times, kind of basically, how much coffee do I need in the morning to get going, that sort of thing. And then because a lot of anime music and then a fair bit of game music tends to be written away from any sort of picture and away from any sort of synchronized picture specifically. So you get to write music in a very sort of free manner, and then it's actually edited, especially the anime stuff, unless it's a feature film or it's a specific request for a synchronized one piece or two pieces of synchronized music to a particular scene. It'll always be freely composed music that is then edited by someone else, normally the sound director and the director together. Obviously, you can of course input, but it's not your final decision. You're kind of just providing all these tools for people to use, which is both liberating, but also can yield some interesting results if you weren't expecting certain things to go in certain places once it actually comes out. So you don't normally see like the completed picture, and you normally don't hear the completed dub unless you attend, which unfortunately I can't do because I don't live in Japan. Although I will seriously work on that in the future. But because would be lovely to split time, but reality has different thoughts right now.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like you're just providing a jukebox with stems and a stemmed jukebox and kind of, you're now at their mercy. Is like, what track are they going to pick for what scene and what, and how loud is it going to be? Like, you don't know any of that until you see it. And sometimes it might be that they cut out all sound effects and all dialogue and just have your track playing almost like it's a music video, which is awesome. Or it could be totally buried between sound effects and dialogue. Could be anything. So that's one part of it. But with games, obviously things are like quite deliberate. Like the two sort of main examples I have from my personal experience is I did a game called Florence, as you mentioned, back in 2018. And then very recently a game called Necrobarista came out. And they have two very, very different approaches to music. Florence is very, very interactive, where we use the multitude of different sort of stemming techniques or like layering techniques, where we would maybe have one ambient track which had singers coming in randomly, or we would have like multiple tension layers coming in depending on what's happening on screen. So there's that sort of compositional element to things where you're like, I need to write a 10-second or a 30-second piece of music, which could layer its could stack itself basically in a compositionally literate way, while also serving what needs to be essentially what would be the synchronized picture, the timing, which is in this case gameplay. So yeah, at some point they do differ like that. I do try and have an approach where, at least for like the first couple of drafts, I'll just write music for music's sake, essentially, as a reaction to story, images, manga, if it's anime manga sort of, if there's any source material, that initial sort of 1 or 2 track reaction where you're just sort of writing music for the sake of, responding in your opinion to it, can be quite, I found that very useful moving forward, because that way, stylistically, you kind of, when you're working with a team or whatever, you kind of on side with each other.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And obviously there tends to be a lot of looping in video game music, because as you said, you don't know what someone's going to do. They're going to spend, 10 minutes in one place doing nothing. Do you have any strategies? Like, obviously you've outlined some of them, but do you have any kind of deliberate strategies about keeping those looped pieces interesting?
So a project I'm working on currently, which I can't go into like extreme detail on, but basically what's happening is I'm playing through the game and making very detailed notes about what I think sucks about the music. So if I'm like, okay, I'm hearing this track that I've written way too much. It's giving me like high blood pressure right now. It needs to like just go away for a bit. And then, either we'll write a different track as like an alternative, or we'll break it down, or we'll extend it. But something needs to happen where it's like, okay, right now I'm not doing anything for anyone. I need to fix that. So yeah, like playing through the game really helps with that sort of thing. It really helps with context. So there are things like that. Obviously, like talking to the director, talking to the team at length about, what we should be doing if we're not doing it already, checking in, just being a good team player, like really helps.
Yeah. Now, beyond the idea of looping and in the world of film, you've got the dub engineer, you've got music editors that are going to take your music and put it into the final product. In a video game, there are other processes of implementation that might be useful, or that might be involved in the process. Are you involved in the implementation process at all?
It does vary project to project. For example, if it has been decided that looped music just go from A to B and then go back, if that way is appropriate, then there's not a lot to really implement it. You just give them what's called a hard loop, which is where you can literally just play the file back to back, and it's going to be completely seamless in its loop. You can go from that all the way down to sort of creating middleware program, like programming middleware yourself. Two of the sort of the main big hitters in what's called middleware. And sorry, just so I'm not sure where everyone's at, like level wise, so I'll just explain it. But apologies if anyone's just like, shut the fuck up and move on. Yeah, basically, middleware is basically where you can tell the music how to react in a interactive setting. So if I was to take, for example, Florence music and be like, okay, we need a progress knob or a dial where it has 3 different levels of progress. I need to be able to make sure that the music seamlessly like sort of fades in between those 3 levels of progress, and potentially back and forth as well in a very natural way. That I'm just trying to like, give it a good layman term sort of thing. But yeah, so it can be up to like me like doing my own sort of like programming in middleware, programming like in the musical term,
Yeah.
Not in the coding term. But yeah, so I've gone up to that point before, and that actually, in my opinion, really helps also get your point across if you're working with people that like, if they're not coming from a musical background, you're not coming from specific game design background or something like that, having that programming, that middleware program in between, just so that you can literally be like, this is how I envision making the music work.
Yeah.
In the gameplay, that goes miles, totally miles.
And does thinking about the middleware, and I don't know if you mentioned the names Fmod and WYs.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I don't know if you did. I think you did, but I wasn't sure. So Fmod and WYs, those are the two main programs. And does thinking about how the music's going to go into those programs affect how you compose for them?
After a point.
Yeah.
After a point. So after that sort of initial, okay, I know what the sound world is. I know what I want to do on a very basic musical level. Once you've sort of like figured out your basic palette, then those thoughts do come into the process. Like again, just for me, I won't speak for anyone else. But I mean, if I'm working on something and I know that there needs to be a certain progression of events, but then with an indeterminate amount of time, then that'll definitely come in. Because then, like I was saying before, it's like if someone's going to spend approximately double the time in one section as they are in a different section, does that longer section of the gameplay require more music, or does it require just a different way of approaching the programming? You know, there's many ways to skin the cat. It's kind of just up to you. One, how you want to do it, and if it's the right approach for that particular thing.
Well, speaking of palettes and multiple ways and freedoms, there is a question coming through from our attendees, and everyone who is attending and watching, you're welcome to shoot through some of your questions, and we'll pepper them in throughout this conversation. So, I got a question here from Ned McPhee. Is it freeing as a composer, or is it sometimes difficult to narrow down on tonal palettes or genres for a series? I hope that's come through clearly. Yeah.
But for me, because I operate much better in like sort of confined parameters, it works well for me. Not confined enough that it's sort of, that you're tied up or that you're kind of constricted. But for example, with Florence, because we knew that like piano and cello were going to kind of be these two like main character instruments, like Florence is piano and Krish is cello. We had a very basic palette to work with, and then there was enough room to expand to say, oh, it would be really good to have like a different color here. Let's add flute, clarinet, whatever, But then we had that groundwork already laid. So I'm not sure if it's freeing, but it definitely helps kind of get a certain identity. And I'm quite keen, like, again, personally speaking, I'm trying to make any sort of particular project sound a certain unique way that sort of represents some sort of core concept or core visual element of the project that I'm working on, whether it became or anime. So, for example, Maiden Abyss, for anyone who's not familiar, again, I'll just kind of explain it just to make sure we can get like a basic conversation. Maiden Abyss basically is about these two young children that are cave divers, and they dive into this giant pit in the middle of the earth called the Abyss. And it's like, miles and miles deep, and it's like super dangerous. And the lower you go, it's kind of like descending into Dante's Inferno, or like Dante. It's like the 7 circles of hell sort of thing. So like, the more further down you go, the more dangerous it's going to be. But the visual element of that show always involved, or at least very frequently involved, these two small characters overlooking this giant vista, which was this abyss, and kind of seeing the beauty that it was. Like, it's a very beautiful scenario, but it's an incredibly dangerous one. So if you think about being able to explain beauty, depth, but then also the scale of small and big, all in one sound, what was decided, what I took a chance on, and thankfully didn't fuck it up, was basically recording a very small amount of musicians relative. So I recorded, I think, like 19 or 20 chamber musicians in Vienna, and they have this stage in Vienna which is run by Vienna Symphonic Library called the Synchron Scoring Stage. And I think they can fit up to like 130, 135 people in this just ridiculous room. And it very, very nice room.
Yeah.
But if you record a small amount of people, first off, you're going to get a very intimate chamber sound. But then the way that they microphone this entire room, there's about 35 channels of audio. Because they can have anything from like back overheads, which are like about, I think they're like 35 feet up. It's massive. They're these huge, like you've got all this surround stuff and you've got this insane decatry and all that sort of thing. So you've got all these different microphone positions to play with, which works really well when we're trying to give a very close but extremely far sound. So you can like boost the surrounds, boost the spots or something like that, and you get some very interesting results. But those sorts of things, deciding those very on, that tends to be freeing because now you've decided your palette and now you're just kind of messing around within it. Yeah. But hopefully not restricting enough that if you run into problems that, you're not all of a sudden like screwed. It's like, oh, well, we only have these specific people. Oh, but we need a voice. Oh, I didn't hire a voice. Sorry. So you don't get into a position where you're kind of screwing yourself as well.
Yeah.
Knock on wood, because this is just theory, man. Just being lucky. It works.
It does sometimes. Yeah, it does definitely sometimes pay to take risks, and there are multiple stories in video game audio and video game music and film music, where composers have taken a risk and paid off immensely.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Your approach to scoring Florence and to scoring Necrobarista are obviously very different. So Florence is that beautiful chamber ensemble, those wonderful musicians from Perth that includes your flute teacher of all people, which is amazing.
How about that?
And Necrobarista is electronic. It combines house, dubstep, and lo-fi. And you've done a hybrid in your other work, like Tower of God. How do you approach those two kind of sound worlds? Do you have a preference for composing more chamber stuff or more electronic, or
definitely no specific preference. I've got areas of strength, or areas of weakness. For example, Necrobarista, we knew that it was going to be a more electronic score, but the way that I produce music, the way I produce on the computer versus the way that the Necrobarista soundtrack producer produces music is very, very different. So I actually collaborated on Necrobarista with a amazing music producer from Vancouver. His name's Jeremy Lim. And so I would write music and we would collaborate on the production. And by that I mean like he made it not sound like shit. Because like it's not my forte, but like compositionally speaking, it was fine. Like the composition in question was not the inherent problem. The inherent thing that needed to be resolved was the fact that this was a world that, while I'm familiar and I can do some things, but he does them way better. So why not collaborate with someone who's really, really bloody good at their job and actually create something that's way better than what you could do solo? So like I knew with Florence, like I can't play all the instruments, so I needed to hire a mixing engineer, hire a recording studio, hire musicians, all that sort of thing. But when it came to a composition, orchestration, and technical score production, all that sort of thing standpoint, I knew I was in the clear. But with Necrobarista, because it's a completely different way of thinking about music, which is very refreshing and really enjoyable and was awesome to do, it's just way more fun, like not stressing over something that's, not your strongest hand, and actually working with a good friend who's really good at that. And actually the whole process, like first off, the product is better. So you're doing a service to the people that have trusted you with especially Necrobarista is a visual novel. There's no, there's not a lot of sound effects. There's not a lot of voice. It's a very, the odds were stacked in the music's favor to be heard a lot. I mean, it's a lot of music on repetition, so you want that to sound really good. And if working with a good friend is the way to do that, that's awesome for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of, even though the sound design is minimal, Matt Dwyer, the sound designer, Necrobarista, has done an incredible job.
Love Matt.
As you consistently, if anyone's ever played Rumu, he's done some incredible creative experiments in that field as well. There sometimes seems to be the stereotype in game audio or in the game audio community that if you want to be a game composer, you have to pay your dues as a sound designer. And you often end up working in both roles. That's a stereotype that's it's been thrown around sometimes. Has that been true for you in any capacity?
I can acknowledge that. I mean, I understand where that stereotype comes from. I can say that in no way does that is that the pathway that happened for me. I know some friends who are bloody composers who are also sound designers and bloody good sound designers as well. So there are people that have that gift of doing both. It's definitely not a compulsory thing, but it depends on maybe what project you're being hired to do.
Yeah,
and we'll also be saying we don't have anyone, we don't have any audio need. And then you're like, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. Then all of a sudden, instead of just thinking that you're going to be writing music, you could be now potentially doing sound effects and also recording. Like you might be hiring voice actors. You might be voice acting yourself. You could be doing a lot of things very quickly. I mean, that's luck.
And
that's luck.
Well, yeah, because sound design can balloon into this immense, especially for games, because it's very different to sound design for film and theater.
It's just a different craft. You just got to make sure that you're either up to the challenge or up to learning very quickly.
Absolutely. Now, the question here about middleware, about obviously audio in games. Are composers expected to learn middleware like Fmod or WWise? And are the prospects of a career more realistic if you have that skill?
I don't know if they're more realistic by nature. I will say that it's not the worst idea just to be familiar. Like just be able to, like, as I was saying, with recording musicians and mixing music, that's not my particular area of expertise. I come before and after, but I could at least talk to a musician and say, okay, I need you to play things a little differently. I need you to be able to play more this and more that. I need the mixing engineers to understand that I'm saying, let's take that out and and being able to give technical feedback on an area is really important. Of an area of your concern is really important, in my opinion. And so if you don't know middleware, I don't think it's like a really. At some point it might be. It depends on the project. But, if you're starting out, it's not going to be like a total deal breaker, but you might need to know that language to be able to talk maybe with the programmer and explain your sort of approach to the music sort of integration. Worst comes worst, you look at a couple of great, very go look at YouTube, and it's not if you work in a DAW, it's not going to be a crazy jump in logic. You're just expanding, you're just working with audio, and you're just, and you're just making parameters for that audio to do things when you tell it to.
Absolutely.
So it's not the hardest jump if you need to learn it.
Yeah. And thankfully something like Fmod is generally free depending on the budget of your project.
Exactly. It's not a crazy stressy time once you wrap your head around the basics.
Absolutely. So it's a good thing to learn, but it's not an absolute necessity for a career as a games composer.
Yeah, unless the developer is we don't know what we're doing, you need to do it.
then it's a good thing to learn.
You probably have to quickly learn. But again, it's not an impossible thing. Trust me. If I can learn that shit, you can.
Well, speaking of learning, there's a question here about how you developed your understanding of writing for film and games. Did you reference books or articles or videos? Well, you just mentioned, going on just on YouTube for a little while, or have you found that your knowledge has just developed over time with the real world experience and working on projects? Or is it a combination of both?
It's a little column A and a little column B. So I did do, for me, formal education worked quite well for some areas. So when I was sort of like starting to go into like undergrad and stuff, I did, like I was like hella obsessed with game music, with anime music and stuff. And I ended up going into what I kind of semi-affectionately call the like imitation phase of my musical life, where like I just heard like a Final Fantasy track, or I heard a Studio Ghibli track, or a Zelda track, or whatever, a Metroid track, and I was just like, I want to sound exactly like that. I'm going to just try and write exactly like that. And, you know, so the influence was very, very overt at the time. And then, so on a creative level, on a stylistic level, eventually these sorts of influences sort of boil down, hopefully, into something that could be relatively considered a personal style.
Yeah.
So there was that part where sort of the base stylistic tools that I was choosing, I wanted to use in my particular handwriting or my particular sort of like arsenal, could sort of like that's one side. And then the other side is like a technical side, and trying to understand, you know, what makes a good piece of film music, what makes a good piece of game music, what makes a good piece of music in general. That sort of education for me came from a formal education. In no way is a necessary thing. It's just the way that worked for me. But through those sorts of teachings, I was able to sort of like cement certain, I guess, I was able to cement certain sort of approaches or certain beliefs that I had about what film music should or should not do, and game music should or should not do, and things that I liked doing. For example, I'm just going to spit like a random piece of like knowledge that I was told by a teacher of mine once, but I remember him just showing me a piece of film. And then there was this woman walking from one side of the screen to the other. And he was literally just like, look at her legs, look at what tempo she's walking at, and then write in that tempo. And it's like so fucking simple, but like those sorts of really small things, like literally just looking at the tempo of what someone is doing on the screen and then writing in that tempo, and just seeing how actually that kind of weirdly sometimes, you know, hopefully like matches up. And if it does, it's actually like, oh, well, that just solves like a huge amount of problems, because that's literally just like the tempo of the scene, because she's walking from one side to the other or whatever. And being able to like work with motion musically and have music kind of bend like water around film or game or gameplay.
I love that expression.
Those sorts of technical teachings were really, really, like, they're very, very important to me personally. So yeah, that's like two schools of education. It's like one's just like imitating on your own, you know, for however long, until you're able to distill something down to hopefully what could be the beginnings of your own handwriting, and then, you know, being able to either, you know, if you choose to be taught by a teacher, by, you know, face to face or virtually now, maybe. That can help with the technical side of things. Experience as well, super important. I know it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, but eventually, like, you just learn how to. The thing with the experience is that it just tells you how to, like, get out of mistakes quicker or avoid them better. Like, that's been the best thing about experience to me. It's like, I remember how I screwed up last time, and it cost me like X amount of dollars. So like, and it doesn't have to be like a money thing, but it's like, oh yeah, I lost, you know, more sleep because of this. Or, you know, I couldn't relax because I had to fix something that I didn't do right the first time. Let's try and avoid that this time. That might be it.
Well, in terms of finding your own voice, the aforementioned agent you got intoxicated with, Fabian Malabello, just a big shout out to him from the Otherworld agency. I've often had conversations with him where he's spoken about the importance of finding your voice, and clearly that's something that you have done incredibly well. I've got a question here. Speaking of losing time or money or mistakes, after writing an orchestral mock-up, how do you know how much time is needed to record a piece with the musicians, and how do you deal with the budget from that point?
Yeah, so that is actually like something that there are like kind of guesstimates of like, a professional orchestra should be able to record 5 to 8 minutes of music per 1 hour of recording. That's like a very, very that's something that I've been told quite a few times. And I think for maybe the majority of cases, that might be an accurate thing.
Yeah. Run the figure again.
So like approximately, I've been told multiple times that a professional group of musicians should be able to record approximately 5 to 8 minutes of music per 1 hour.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
But that's the thing. This is all approximate because it comes down to a couple of things. One, is the music that you have prepared legible?
Yes.
Is it eligible? I mean, look, I guess it needs to be eligible as well, but I meant to say legible.
Yes.
So is it legible? Are your recording sessions, your Pro Tools sessions or your recording file sessions, are they ready to go or have they been prepared in advance? Are you going to be wasting time having to explain things to a musician or a recording engineer because something happened which should have been fixed before getting into the expensive room with all the microphones?
Yeah. And that's obviously true of whether you're doing it for games or film.
Yes, exactly. That's just recording 101, like be prepared. Mm-hmm. And, it does take time, and preparing scores, especially large scale scores, takes time, and it's not like the funnest of tasks. You don't sit there like, oh man, I can't wait to get on the Sibelius or finale to like accept the Flute 2. It's not where you wake up in the morning with a big grin on your face. But it's very, very important work, and the result speaks for itself. Because that way, in theory, you should be able to record at least smoothly. Now, the only other problem with that 5 to 8 minute thing bracket that I mentioned to you is, for me personally, what I found is that there are the minimal mistakes now, thankfully, just through like repeating that process a couple of times with different orchestras, but it's also about how technically challenging the music is.
Yeah.
If you're writing music that it is good, it's well written, it's well organized, but it's still not the easiest thing to play. It's going to naturally take a little bit more time. And if you're a stickler for taking multiple takes, like, I've got some vocalists, and I've worked with some vocalists in the past, and I think for a 2-minute track, I think we did 180 takes, and we used them. We used a lot of them. So I personally cut music. I cut takes very, very frequently. There's like a passage in Florence from one of the tracks where there's like a 30-second cello solo, and it's got 7 takes. Wow. Just Frankenstein together. But that's my personal approach, because I'm like, okay, do something different every time. I'm going to take the best elements of each note or bar, and I'll just personally go into Pro Tools and just like cut like crazy. But if it's a project that isn't requiring that level of narcissism, then you can do 5 to 8 minutes probably pretty easy. Yeah. So that's like a long-winded answer.
No, that's good. That's good. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start feeling more of the questions, which kind of bleed into the rest of the conversation anyway. So yeah, that sounds good. In terms of notations, the question here, when you're working with chamber groups, do you orchestrate and create the sheet music for the musicians to play in the studio, or do you work with someone else to do that?
I have worked with other people in the past on projects that have not required like as much narcissism in the details, and that's been very nice because if there is budget there, it is really nice to be able to it's nice to go to sleep at 10 o'clock. I gotta say, I love waking up. I love going to bed early. I love waking up early. But if you're working on all these scores, you don't get to do that all the time. So it is nice when you do have some support around you. The majority of times, though, I am kind of just doing it myself.
Yeah.
And whether it be 5 musicians or I think the max I've ever done is like 32 at a time, like on one score. But yeah, it's a lot of detail.
Yeah,
and you just got to take time. So yeah, I have done it majoritively myself. Although on those rare occasions where a project comes and you're like, can get a little hand, can get some help on this one. It's like, it is a nice feeling.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's what people who are more successful than me feel on a more regular basis.
Now you're talking about collaborating with Jeremy Lim on doing some hybrid stuff, but you obviously do your own hybrid stuff as well in your own ways. Someone's asked a question here about how do you go about adding electronic elements to chamber music that you've composed, like you did for Made in Abyss.
This comes back to I was shown a piece of Brian Eno music while I was still studying. And this particular piece, I think it was one of the pieces for Music for Airports. But the teacher basically pointed out how every single sound had its own frequency range, and that none of the sounds that he was using in any way kind of clashed or muddied a different texture from a different instrument, whether it be out of acoustic sound source or an electronic sound source. Yeah. So when you think of electroacoustic music or hybrid music, for me, it's just like using, whether it be from an acoustic source, whether it be from an electronic source, it's more about how they're meshing together. And then that's how that balance is sort of decided. Tower of God was an anime that was completed recently. And one of the character themes literally involved like harp and dubstep wubs. Like it's just those two elements, and I've got like some dial-up tones in there, so it's like really like tingly dial-up tones, solo harp, and like fuck off dubstep wubs, and it's just those 3 elements, and it's just all about how those 3 kind of mesh together, which hopefully made the piece like appealing enough to not get me fired. So it's a for me it's about finding that balance, whether it be acoustic or electric, and just kind of deciding what sounds work together, and then in the greater context of the film, anime, game, whatever, what are these sounds representing in sort of like this particular story or world or whatever.
Yeah, cool. Now, this question here, we've spoken about your experience with both mediums, with games and film, or linear structures and interactive structures, but do you have a preference?
Depends on whether I'm putting coffee or tea in my cup in the morning there. Or gin. No, but just a little trick. Like right now I'm working on both, which is really, really nice. It also maybe depends on like deadline. Like if the game is due sooner than an anime or a film, maybe you'll focus more on the game. There is no preference. It's just like, hey, what do I feel like doing today? That's like leisure level number 1. And then like the level down from that is like, okay, what's due next? And then you kind of just go back and forth. So yeah, they both have their different quirks, but they're all fun. Hopefully.
Cool. So there's also a couple of questions on networking, and in in some of our, sometimes we call it hustling. Is there kind of a big difference between hustling for games and hustling for film? And sort of what's kind of been your strongest approach to networking in general? Yeah,
so like I'm not sure how good of an example I am. I'll say my piece, but there are people that speak at length very eloquently on this subject that are not me. But I'll tell you how I've been able to like kind of do things, and we'll go from there. So basically, as you mentioned before, I do have an agent who's also my best friend for video games, and then I also have basically an equivalent of for the anime. So Fabian lives here in Melbourne. My anime representative lives in Tokyo. And I'm constantly in touch with basically these two people. That's sort of like, that's my immediate sort of, outreach. Fabian and, his name's Jima, but, Fabian and Jima are very, very good at talking to people. And, they know people and they're very, very good at that. For me, I love meeting people, but I'm not good at introducing myself to people, which is a fatal flaw. But the flip side of that is that, because there is a certain circle of people that I hang around with who have my back, who are very good at that. Yeah. It's slightly different, or at least that's sort of like the get out of jail free card. So it's kind of a catch-22 because I have done the cold opening before. I've done the cold approach and all that sort of thing to varied success. What I've found works best now, kind of funnily enough, being on the flip side of that, is if you just rock up and you're a genuine person and you're fun to talk to, or not, you don't even need to be fun to talk to. Just when you meet someone and it's someone's serious or someone's very passionate and not in a overzealous or no one's inappropriate or no one is able to read the room and just be a good person to just sort of interact with. That goes unbelievably far. The way that you I now work with people who have done cold emails to me and be like, hi, so you work on this, so it was really good. Just sort of introduce myself. And I was like, okay, I totally get you. And this is great. You seem like a really well put together person. And if something comes up and I feel you're appropriate, I would love to talk to you. So it's just about being a half decent person most of the time.
As a practical extension to that, and we've probably only got a couple of minutes left, I'm not sure if the other moderators would like to let me know if we're taking more questions beyond these questions or if we're finishing off in a couple of minutes, but just give me a little nod. Practical extension to the question of networking, and which is a bit of a weird question in 2020, but are there groups, events, or networks in Australia for someone who'd like to connect and get involved in game audio?
Oh yeah, there's quite a few Facebook groups and stuff where composers just either talk tech or all that sort of thing. Actually, you might be able to help me with this a little bit. Is it? Because it's there's the Anzac group, right?
Yes, Anzac for
ANZA, Anzac, but that's just for Australian and New Zealand audio engineers or audio peoples, I believe. There's the Scorecast groups. There's quite a few groups online. Business skills for the composers and stuff like that. There are some really good groups online, and people are more than happy to talk shop or talk industry stuff there. There's many groups at your disposal. Business skills for composers. Anzac, which is just the audio engineer one. Just, I think you got maybe type in Anzac audio engineer or musician something into Facebook, and eventually that group should come up. Yeah,
cool.
So there's resources like that.
And then if you're in Melbourne, IGDA Melbourne, Independent Games Developers Association Melbourne, that would have meetups every month, pre-pandemic. What else is there? There's a bunch more actually.
There's quite a few. So I was just typing saying I'm happy to take just a few more questions. So
wonderful. So
run out the clock a little bit.
Cool. If you've got any more questions, keep them coming in. I will make sure to ask them.
Yes.
There's another question. Another question on networking, which I know you were saying you.
If I can be useful, I will be useful.
How is your experience trying to find an agent in Tokyo and also working with Japanese teams? Do you find that you have to travel there in person for people to take you seriously, or can you work remotely with good success?
This is kind of a very, very, because there's not a crazy amount of precedent for Australians working on anime in a music capacity. I'm not aware of any Australians prior to. I mean, there are a couple of Australians that have worked here and there, actually. So I'll retract that a little bit. But it's not like the most common thing so far. Although, of course, like I'm really happy that the anime industry in general is starting to really sort of come out of its shell internationally. As a fan of anime, I'm really happy with that. Happy for that, rather. But so Japan, for me, because there was a cultural interest, that kind of paved a couple of things. And I mentioned at the start of this, we have the I started doing like game music with Japanese companies or through Japanese clientele, which then led into anime. And because of that lead through, there was an introduction made to the person that would then become now my sort of anime representative, so to speak.
Yeah.
That started with one company, and they had their person that they would go to. Jima is his name. And then when I started working with that company, they introduced me to him as my point man, essentially, moving forward. And then because we worked really well together, we developed a relationship, which is still very strong today and continues today. And so that sort of became a de facto thing. So there wasn't I didn't like kind of like cold call anyone in the anime industry, which kind of differs it a little bit because it is a slightly more closed off industry from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And let's say games, especially like indie games, because there's not really the same amount of conferences. There's not the same. There are conventions. There are metric shit ton of anime conventions. Again, when play isn't happening, and those are really good to go to. But that's more of a celebration. There's not a crazy amount of academic conferences. Say, for example,
it's more consumer facing. You mean?
Exactly. So. Anime is an interesting one in terms of working with Japanese teams. Just to the second part of the question, because I speak conversationally fluent Japanese, I'm able to. If there's a problem, if there's a word I don't understand, Google Translate's just there. I just type in the word and it shows me which one I'm missing. So that's lucky, and I would probably argue that unless you have someone on your team or someone who's bringing you onto the team who is bilingual or is able to procure some sort of translator, then either you're going to have to know enough or there's going to have to be some sort of go around, and which is perfectly possible. It just adds another problem to be solved in the chain.
Of course. Cool. Thank you for that. All right. Here's a couple of questions on rights ownership. Do you have to assign your rights, and do you have a lawyer to help with that in terms of the music you make for anime/games?
I don't think that there are any areas I shouldn't talk about, but I mean, look,
is this one for Sebastian Wolf?
I mean, look, what I'll say is, from what I've experienced, I mean, Japanese video game companies, they tend to own their IP, including the music, so you tend to get bought out. There are buyouts, unfortunately, but it is the reality of the situation in some projects, for some companies, for some cultures.
Yeah.
Whether that changes in the future, that's going to come with time, and sort of, let's say if you're a very, very high status composer being hired to compose something for a big company in a different country, where they're asking you to do something because they are a fan of your music, you'll probably maybe have a little bit more ground to negotiate better rates if you are going to be bought out, or you could negotiate some sort of royalty payment or back pay or something like that. So like as things progress, that conversation can become easier to have. I've definitely taken on a crap load of work where it has been just like, you're going to get paid this, and there's like, that's all we got, so you got to either take it or leave it, and we've got to have the music as well. We've got to have the music. That's not an ideal situation, but it's also kind of, if you're a young composer trying to work, call it what you will. It's either like, you know, a good shot of the job or it's exploitation, depending on your opinion. But, you know, that's the reality of the situation. You could take that job or you could not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of ownership, because when you release some of that music, some of those scores, Spotify under your name, how does your ownership of the music tie into your ability to release it under your name? That's part B of a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, basically.
No. Sorry, that's the part I'm adding now.
Oh, okay.
Not what you missed.
Shit. What did I miss it?
No, you're good, man. You're good.
Well, because you have mechanical royalties and the writer's share, you have two different types of royalties. Normally, when you're being bought out, a lot of that time it's to do with the mechanical rights. So your ability to earn money on, let's say, like sales of the game, maybe sales of the soundtrack if it's a bet, like, you know, it's a difficult deal or something like that. You know, there are certain types of royalties, or the mechanical royalty, and like how like that master recording that you created for that project, in what way are you either going to receive or not receive money, is normally separated from the writer's share, which is like you wrote it, and so you're entitled to that share, which is normally administrated through APRA AMCOS rather. And so, you know, it might be still attached to your name, and you might get a performance royalty because, you know, the show played on, you know, let's say that your show is played on TV, that'll not only just be a mechanical royalty, that'll also be a writer's share, which is then, you know, sent to your performing rights organization, which is then eventually going to trickle down to you. It's just, you know, it's all about that mechanical royalty, because that's CD sales, that's, you know, licensing, all that sort of stuff. And that's where a lot, you know, that can be your retirement. And so you know, that's what you kind of want to be fighting for. So yeah, like, you know, I haven't had too many instances where my writer's share's gone tits up, but but yeah, mechanical thing, especially in games, it's a much longer conversation. And I will admit, like, even though I can understand it for myself, the way that I explain it versus where someone who does this for a living explains it is not going to be as eloquent or nuanced. So I do apologize for that. I am doing my best, but it's also just like, I know what these are, and I know if I'm getting it or
Of course. And that's why you're a composer, not a lawyer.
Exactly. That's one of the many reasons why I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe you're a lawyer. We don't know what you're doing.
No.
And obviously, bodies like APRA, AMCOS, there's a lot of people here that can answer these questions at depth.
Exactly.
And the Australian Guild of Screen Composers would have many answers for that as well. So yes. Now, we're going to probably wrap it up. But Necrobarista, your most recently released project, how can people play that game and listen to your music?
Necrobarista is this visual novel game done by a lovely team of people based in Melbourne, for the most part, but a beautiful team of people. They've been working on this game, I think, since like 2016, or maybe even 2015. Like, they put their heart and soul into this incredible game, and it's finally, like, it literally just came out like days ago. Yes. After all this time. And it came out on Steam, so you can play it on PC, you can play it on the Apple Arcade. Soundtrack's on Bandcamp, it's also on Spotify, YouTube, all that sort of fun stuff. That was the one I did with, that we've been talking about with Jeremy Lim, where he did like the production stuff to make it sound really cool and stuff. So Necrobarista is like the most recent thing, and yeah, give it a shot.
Wonderful. Now, just on that Necrobarista, before we wrap up, I do remember you showcasing it at GCAP, which is Games Connect Asia Pacific. That's one of the events where game audio people and game people in general, games people come to connect. There's also obviously events like PAX. I'm just coming back to that previous question. We were trying to think of events and networks and groups. So yeah, keep an eye out for PAX and GCAP and Games Developer Conference, which are other places to connect globally and nationally.
Yeah, and before I forget, there is also a game music specific conference that happens as part of PAX, like sort of what again, in a normal year. But basically, every year in Melbourne, there's this thing called High Score, and they normally get a lot of people talking at High Score, about game music, both on the technical and creative side. They normally get a lot of guests in. And I know that it's happening like online this year,
Yeah.
I think.
No, that's going to be, High Score is fantastic. And you gave a couple of great talks at that. We had other fantastic composers from Australia and different parts of the world speak on their processes in depth, like Christopher Larkin on Hollow Knight and Manami Matsumoi. Damn it, I got her name wrong. Manami Matsumai. There we go. Speaking on Mega Man, which has been some incredible stuff happening. So, yeah. So there's a lot happening and a lot of ways to get into this field. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with that we haven't spoken about?
I hope everyone's safe. Let's be honest. It's pretty shit. Yeah. I will try and turn it around a little bit. But yeah, everything sucks. Bye. Peace out. No. Especially film composers have probably felt it a little bit more than game. As far as I can tell, because things just had to stop
because films aren't being made.
Yeah, I know friends that this, they just can't go to the studio. They can't go to their writing studio. They can't even do their job. They can't even all these things are unfortunately happening this year, and depending on certain countries and when they decide to take the situation a little more seriously, we may be stuck in a little bit of a rut for a while. But it's been I think this is a great time to kind of reflect on skill. I've definitely been keen on maybe learning a third language, or just being able to maybe learn some more technical things to do with music that normally we would not have the time to do. And obviously the fact that a lot of there's a lot of income that isn't happening right now, which puts additional stress on things. And I know it's not always I'm not earning any money, might as well go back to school. I know that's not always the most logical jump to that, but I think, education, or a return to education has been a very appealing thing at this time. Because at least you feel like you're doing something when you physically probably can't even leave the house unless you go into Baker's Delight or some shit. At least you get to do something and feel a little bit productive. So yeah, I would say if there's anything that I could say might be worth thinking about, even though thankfully Australia's I know Melbourne's fucked, but we're in a relatively good position worldwide. At least we've got some options of, it could be education, it could be the game community is very strong here, and people are very passionate, and there's a lot of support I think in general right now. So
if you're a screen composer, maybe have a think about games now, because it
can't hurt. It's a great film. It's a great film. And it's great when you're having a bad film music day and you're like, man, I hate this. but
I feel you.
The game we're going to write for is actually, you get to balance. Finding balance in 2020 is a bit of an oxymoron, but it's been a good challenge. It's been a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you today, and having everyone interact and throw their questions, and having you answer them so generously and graciously.
Okay. Sorry, I hope I didn't skip over anything by accident, and if I did, it just I tweet way too much. So just if it's there, just be I was from this. Can you follow up on this, and I'll do my best.
Where can people follow you?
At Kevin Penkin.
At Kevin Penkin, wonderful. On
the
Twitter and Instagram.
I am on Instagram, but that's mostly for cats. And
hey,
I make a lot of bolognese.
We need more. Yes, cats and bolognese.
Cats and bolognese. That's a great fucking band name. Cats and bolognese. That's a great band name.
Wonderful. Well, High Score 2020 will be happening online. So keep an eye out for that later this year. And Necrobarista is out now, so if you're feeling like a visual novel and a bit of slice of the outside, Necrobarista takes place in Melbourne, in a cafe in Melbourne. So Do play that and listen to Kevin's fantastic music. So does Florence, by the way. It takes place in Melbourne, around the Queen Victoria markets in some places.